Welcome to another episode of Future Tribe. Today we've got Kevin Douglas Wright with us, all the way from the US. How are you today, Kevin?
Pretty good. Can't complain. Just hanging out down here up here in South Florida in the United States.
Nice.
Yeah,
Awesome.
yeah.
So tell me a bit about what you do.
I'm an independent filmmaker, and usually just to be to make it easy, I'm outside of the Hollywood studio system, so I'm just totally independent. I've been to Hollywood, California before, but I don't work out there.
Mm.
So I do all of my stuff in the state of Florida. Um, so I produce, write, and direct, and so far I've done two films, two films.
And where can we find your films, just to get an idea of
Um,
sort of the
the
extent?
the main one that I'm promoting right now is available on Amazon.com, and the name of the film is "I Learned It From You," and it's a
Mm.
documentary. The documentary.
Okay. So, I mean, first question I can think of is how did you get on Amazon.com? Is it a lot of sort of work? Is it fairly easy?
It's I think some luck must play a part because I belong to a lot of different Facebook groups, and
Mm.
you'll see that some people have issues trying to get on there. Sometimes there's major delays. I experienced probably a slight delay, maybe a few weeks. And since that was my first film that I was trying to get on there, and that I was new at submitting it to something like Amazon.com, I didn't know how long it was supposed to take, or so I didn't really know that the 2 weeks or 3 weeks that I waited, I didn't know if that was customary, if that was
Mm.
long, if that was fast. So I didn't get angry or anything. I just was patiently waiting. And I would say it's probably easy, but I have seen postings where people have experienced either technical difficulties, whether
Mm.
it was on their end or they couldn't figure out whose end it was on. Um, and it took them maybe a month or 2 months or
Right.
something like
So when
that.
you say
So
Amazon.com, is that Amazon Prime, the video service, or is it more like a digital download that you can purchase?
it's actually the way mine is, it's both. So you can actually stream it and watch it
Mm.
online. You can also purchase it online and watch it online. You can download it online. I did put it in the form of a DVD, so you can actually purchase the DVD from
Yes.
Amazon.com also. So you can either stream it or you can rent it. But if, let's say, for instance, I'm not sure if they do it the same in Australia, but
Mm.
they have Amazon Prime. If you belong to Amazon Prime, my particular documentary you can watch for free. It's included
Right.
with Amazon Prime. And
Right.
let's say you do not have Amazon Prime, then you would just either rent it, and I believe it's in U.S. dollars. It's either $2.99 or $3.99.
Hmm. Hmm. And
Yeah.
so talk me back to, so how did you get on this journey? Were you always planning to be a,
Yeah.
a movie producer, a film producer,
hmm
or is this something that sort of happened unexpectedly out of nowhere?
hmm
Talk me through it.
Um, I trace it back all the way to when I was little. I always just loved movies, which everyone loves movies. Um, but I always wanted to try to make a movie.
Mhm.
But what I noticed was, as I was growing up, going through college, that most of the ways to break into the business, you had to go to Hollywood. And, just by the nature of the jobs that I had and the career direction I was currently in at that time,
Mhm.
it was pretty hard to just stop everything and move to California. So I always just kept my eyes open just to see if something would change. And actually, what allowed me to get into the business or the industry was just the way technology changed. Once
Right.
technology changed, then I kept seeing where, wow, you can do a lot more stuff, on your own, that you really don't have to go there.
Mhm.
And I think the biggest change was when digital came out, when digital really, really, where you really start seeing that you could actually make a movie and put it into movie theaters in digital form. That really changed everything
Because it made it
because
more accessible for you.
yes.
Yeah. So
So
is it you by yourself or is it a team? And do you do this full time or is it sort of a side hustle at the moment?
mhm. Right now, I'm transitioning to make it full time. So I would say
Mm,
right now it's probably 60-40, where
mm,
I'm on my way to making it full time. In terms of teams, when I did the first film, like I said, that started off as a student project when I was in
mm,
film school. And that consisted of myself and a few students. And then once I got out of film school, I just continued that project on my own and just extended it to be a more of a feature length movie.
mm, mm.
And then what ended up happening was the technology changed again, where I could see that I could do a lot more. So I said, well, I'll keep my eyes open for another idea while I'm still editing my first student film.
Mhm.
And that's where I came up with the idea with the documentary. And then with the documentary, it was just an idea that came about because it was just like a family gathering, and I was talking to my parents, and I had just asked them a question that just I had never asked them before. And
Mhm.
then I could tell by the way that they were answering that they had never been asked that question before. So then I started thinking, and I said to myself, wow, I said, I wonder how many other people um, have those kinds of stories, like when they answer that particular question. And
Right.
from that moment on, it was just like, I got to do this as a documentary. And
Yeah.
then I just went from there, and then it just snowballed, and it just kept going, 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 going. And a lot of stuff I didn't even know in advance what I was going to do with it after I got it done, or even I didn't even know who was going to be in the documentary. Just
Mhm.
everything, the way it unfolded, it just, I can't explain it.
It
It
just
just came
happened.
out. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
it just really rolled out
And
together.
what do you credit that to? Do you think you did the groundwork, the foundational work that got you these opportunities that seemed like it just sort of happened and rolled into it? But
Right.
in reality, did you sort of, whether intentionally or unintentionally, just, turn up and show up and have and unintentionally lay down the groundwork, so to speak? Or is it just, you weren't trying and it was just sheer luck that it just sort of
I,
fell on your plate?
I would say that a lot of stuff that I did beforehand really helped me do the documentary smoothly.
Mm.
So,
This is the second
it
documentary.
yeah, the second film, yes, the
Yeah, second
documentary.
film. Sorry.
If I didn't do the first student film and I didn't go to film school, it probably would have been a lot harder.
Mm.
If I didn't, make a lot of mistakes making that first film, it would have been a lot harder. Let's see, some of the other little things that helped me, just using Facebook to do postings to try to find people that I wanted to see if they wanted to be in the
Mm.
documentary.
To sort of network,
Even,
essentially.
yeah, yeah. So, and I was never really that big into Facebook before, but just because I started to just investigate it as like an advertising type of medium.
Yeah.
So when the time came that I did when I decided to do the documentary, and I wanted to find some more people, and I wanted to find people that I didn't know at all,
Mm.
um, the Facebook skills came into play, and that did make it easier. So I would have to say there were a lot of things that I did before that I didn't know were really going to help me out when it came time for that
Came time for
idea
it.
for the
So
documentary.
place it on a calendar for me. So when did you, I mean, if you don't mind me asking, how old are you now?
How old am I?
Yeah.
49. 49. Just
Okay.
turned 49. Yeah.
So you don't look it, just putting it
Yeah,
out
no, yeah, I get
there.
that. I
You
get
don't
that
look even
all.
close to it.
Yeah, no. When most people ask me, they're expecting 30,
Yeah,
30, mid
30 sort of
30s. Yeah,
max.
yeah.
Yep. So if
Hmm.
anyone listening to the podcast, you won't see Kevin and how young he looks, but hop on the YouTube channel and you can see what I'm sort of. I was startled. I was sort of
Yeah,
expecting 30s
yep,
maybe, but not much older than that.
yeah.
So
49.
you've done very well. But so give me sort of an idea. So it sounds like you went back to film school or went to film school at, let's say, a more mature age. Is that fair to
Correct. Yeah.
say?
Hmm.
Okay. And how was that experience like? Like, did it take a lot of work to get into? I guess what I'm trying to address here is that I feel like there are people who use age as a reason not to do things, or a
Right.
reason as a
Hmm.
barrier. Did you have that as, I mean, before you went and did it, did you have that sort of in the back of your mind that you chances are going to be some, older,
Hmm.
and those challenges associated with it? Was that something that you sort of thought
It
through?
it never actually really crossed my mind. I just knew that I always wanted to try to do film,
Mm,
and I'm trying to think how old I was when I went to film school. I was probably probably about a good 5 years ago, maybe 4 or 5
mm,
years ago that I went to
mm.
film school. Maybe 3 or 4 years. I should say 3 or 4 years. 3 or 4 years ago. And my age, I didn't think anything of it.
You didn't think anything
Um,
of it.
no, I didn't think, because I think mostly because I'm always just trying to learn things and figure stuff out and tinker with
Mm.
things. So I didn't think like, oh, I might be a little bit too old to learn this or anything like that.
Mm.
I didn't think anything like
You
that.
just
No.
so did
No.
you sort of invest directly into the equipment, or did you sort of start off slowly? Because I know, I mean,
Hmm.
I've we've got cameras and things like that, and
Hmm.
um, it's very easy to be sucked into spending
Oh,
a lot more money, because
yeah.
everything's
Yeah.
better, and the bigger and the more money you spend, it
Hmm.
just becomes seems like it's just something you need, something that's going to hold you back. Um, did you take that leap and buy a whole bunch of equipment, or would you say that do we need that equipment to get the ball rolling, or is it more important to sort of just make do with what you have to start off with?
When I started film school, the technology still wasn't where it is right now. So it's way easier now. When I
Mm,
first got into film school, as I was in film school, lasted a little bit less than a year, and this was
mm,
a unique film school. And this is the crazy part: that film school doesn't exist anymore.
right.
They were purchased by another bigger school, and then they moved that school to California, and then from there they moved the
Right.
school to the Philippines. And so now
Okay.
that particular film school doesn't exist anymore. But the
Mm,
way that they did it, you were allowed to use all of their equipment. So I didn't need any
mm,
equipment. So
mm,
I just would sign out the equipment, and I'm I guess they were just trusting everyone that you weren't going to break it or anything, and no one
mm,
did. And so when it came time to do your project, you had pretty much state of the art movie equipment,
mm.
everything that you would really use on a real Hollywood set or whatever.
Yeah.
And when it came time to edit your movie, they had a whole room, like an editing room, and they had the big computers there, the desktop computers, and everything was real expensive. So the only place to edit was at the school.
Right.
Just as I finished school, that's when the technology changed and Apple came out with a lower priced editing
Mm,
software that could run on a laptop. And
mm,
when that changed, that made it way easier.
yeah.
Before that, I would have been stuck. I wouldn't have been able to do been able to do the editing.
Mm. So,
So go ahead.
yep. Talk to me about some of the we've talked about the good stuff, the positive stuff, so to speak. Talk to me about some of the challenges that you faced, and the mistakes that you made that, for anyone listening, you would sort of advise them not to, or maybe look out for any sort of
Hmm.
um, things that you would have done that
Yeah.
you would, change, you would like to have
Hmm.
known in advance.
I would say, let's say someone was going to try to make a film. I would say that the biggest mistake would be, number one, is purchasing a tremendous amount of equipment,
Mm,
unless you have the budget to do that. If you have the budget to do that and you're not going to miss that money, then fine. But there were a lot of people in my film class that did spend a lot of money on the equipment, but I guess they had the money to do it.
mm,
And they, after film school, if they didn't move to California, it was kind of tough because they didn't really have opportunities to use the equipment. So a lot of them tried to sell it or get rid of it. But if you're going to do it, I would say just probably use stuff that you have on hand, which a lot of people have iPhones, or it doesn't
Yeah.
even have to be an iPhone. You
Yeah.
can film a lot of stuff just using
With
your
a basic
normal,
phone,
with
smartphone.
the basic phone, with the
Yeah.
smartphone, and
Yeah.
just make sure it's set to HD, and that's
Yeah,
it.
HD. What are the other things to look out for when they're? I guess I'm thinking now. I'm very big about content marketing and content creation,
Hmm.
and I'm
Hmm.
thinking out to clients and people and friends who I've met. Who I hear the challenge all the time, saying it's easy for you to say to make a video because you've
Yes.
got the DSLR and you've got the sound, the
Yes.
microphones and the lighting and all that, but if we were to strip it back and let's say I took my phone out and I was going to make a video, what are some quick tips that I should look out for?
I would say number one is to scale everything down. So, in other words, what I mean by that is, let's say you're going to film a commercial or a video or a movie.
Mm,
The fewer characters, the better. The
mm,
less people involved, the better. Because as you add more people, whether they're going to be on screen or helping, it makes everything a lot more difficult, because if you're going to film something more than one day, you have to look at everyone's schedules. Now it's more of a scheduling thing. And
mm,
just that scheduling and trying to make sure everyone shows up, depending upon if they're being paid, market rate or below market rate or something like that, that's where I see a lot of problems come up.
mm,
So you just really have to have a handle on how many people are going to be involved. If you can do a lot of the stuff yourself, which I would say you really could do a lot of the stuff just single-handedly with a camera. And
mm.
when it comes to something like lighting, um, it's really easy to learn lighting by just looking at a few YouTube videos, and you can just use regular just lights that are already on hand, and then just
Mm.
position the person near a window, or if you're going to be outside, where the sun is. So you would have them facing a certain way so that the sun is catching them a certain way.
Mm.
So that would eliminate that real big need for lighting, someone to move the lights, finding some place to plug in the lights, because depending upon how many lights you have and you're plugging them into power sources, you could you could cause like a fuse to burst or something like that.
Yes. Yeah.
So you could eliminate lighting by just using natural light and the lights that are in the room. Nowadays you can get away with the microphone, because now I'll say it this way. Yes, there are better, higher quality ways to get sound. But
Mm.
if you're on a tighter, smaller budget, you could use someone's cell phone, and then
Mm.
you can stick the little microphone in through their clothes, and it could go up and be close nearby, and you can get pretty good sound. Now, obviously, like I said, now if you're using real sound equipment, it would be higher quality.
Yeah,
But a
that's a
lot of
different
the stuff,
story.
yeah, a lot of the cell phones, and depending upon what you plug into it, are pretty good. And when
Mm.
you get it into editing, you could
Clean it
most
up
of
a
the
little
edit,
bit.
yeah, you can clean it up a little bit,
Yeah.
so there's lighting and sound that you can really, fudge a little bit and get
Mm.
around.
Mm.
And if you keep the amount of people involved smaller, you could really do it. And
And
the
that's
only
the
other
big
okay,
thing. Sorry, I
I
cut
was
you
just gonna
off.
add one more thing. If you plan it out, like what you're going to do, some people just like to fly by the seat of their pants,
Yes.
which you can do if it's a music video or something like that, because that's not really something that has to be structured.
Yes.
But anything else, I always write out and plan out what I'm going to do, what I'm
Yeah.
trying to say, and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah, so I was going to say, I mean, sort of taking it back to the points is first of all, plan what you're going to do,
Yes.
no matter what it is. And I think
Hmm.
lighting and audio both are important, but
Hmm.
um, it's a very good tip to try and get the audio as close to your mouth as possible. I think that's a
Yes,
big trick there, because you
definitely.
can get away with an iPhone video. If you're facing, say, a window and there's natural light flooding in,
Yes.
but that
Hmm.
distance is going to be the real catch.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
So if you can get audio
Definitely.
somehow closer to you, I would
Hmm.
assume that like a headset microphone is probably still going to be better than onboard audio on an iPhone from a
Correct.
distance.
Yes. Yes.
So
Definitely.
that's another tip there. And you can purchase tripods for fairly
Oh yeah.
cheap nowadays,
Hmm.
especially the
Yeah.
mobile phone ones. So along with planning, I think most people can come up with, especially if you're doing video for, say, YouTube, or a video for your website, where you don't need 4K,
Right.
because it gets compressed anyway, and it
Hmm.
needs to be a smaller file size versus a larger
Yeah.
file size. And if you're talking about, I mean, the podcast, for example, I'm using an old webcam because ultimately, as long as they get a general idea of how we look and
Yep.
our expressions and our sort of how we emote and how we move our hands,
Hmm.
they don't need the finer detail. They don't need to see, the pimple on my cheek, or
Yeah.
that's sort of besides the point. And I think a lot of people hold themselves back by saying, I don't have the money, I can't invest.
Yes.
And
Hmm.
then even talking back to software, I would say um, there's free software nowadays.
Yeah.
There's
Yes.
very cheap
Definitely.
software,
Hmm.
and it's very
Hmm.
easy to use. I mean, you mentioned the YouTube videos. There's a lot of information, a lot of tips that you can get just from a YouTube video.
Definitely. I've picked
So,
up a lot of stuff from just random YouTube videos. I learned a lot from going to the film school, but the way that I look at it, you could really find a lot of the same stuff in YouTube videos, more so now than back then.
yes,
And that's not that far back then, but
but it
um,
just improves so much in
yeah,
terms of the
yeah.
content that you have access to.
Hmm.
It's a
Hmm.
different world nowadays, I would say, even compared to 5 years ago.
Hmm.
I mean, what was it, 10 years ago that the first iPhone came out? And if you think back, the changes that have happened over the last 10 years,
Yeah.
not just in the iPhone realm, but things like Google Maps,
Hmm.
things like, even the cars and self-driven cars and the cameras that you can get on phones. It's
Yeah.
quite a different world now. And agree or disagree with me, I'd be interested to hear. But there's very few reasons nowadays why someone can't make a good video. They should theoretically have everything
Yes.
around them,
Yes. Hmm.
especially if, yeah.
Yeah. Easily. Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah.
100%.
I mean, especially if you're listening to a podcast, I would say you've got the tools. You're probably listening to the podcast on the very same tool that you can use to get away
Yeah.
with making a video for yourself.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I agree with that.
Um,
100%.
any other sort of mistakes that you made that come to mind? Not necessarily even video related or film school related, but just any sort of good tips that you've sort of learned over the years.
I would still have to, it falls under the category of planning it out,
Mm,
knowing what you want to do before you get into it, because it just makes it more smooth. And it makes, if you're going to be working with a few other people, it makes it more of a easier day, more everyone feels confident that you know what you're doing. I think that's the best way to put it.
especially where scheduling and time is a
Yes.
factor,
Hmm.
because then
Yeah.
you'd go into it sort of knowing what you want to get versus sort of trying to think on the fly.
Yes.
And I mean, I
Yeah.
do a bit of photography as well, and I find the same thing. Having a mood
Hmm.
board, being able to say, this is not the exact thing that we want, this is not the
Hmm.
exact, say, photo that we want, but
Hmm.
this is a good idea of what we're after.
Hmm. Yeah.
And being able to show someone and being able to communicate those things very quickly
Yeah. Definitely. Yeah.
is
Definitely.
key, because time's always the big factor. Whether you're paying
Yes.
someone or their time is free,
Hmm.
it's still a finite resource. It's not
Yes.
unlimited. Um, so, I mean, go back to sort of what you're doing. What are you hoping to sort of do moving forward? What's sort of the next step now? So are you slowly, gradually moving to doing film full time, or what's your
Yes.
plan?
Um, since I would consider, I'm considered what you call an independent, so I wear many different hats. The hat that I'm wearing now is more of the PR, like the public relations and the marketing type of hat.
Mm,
So what I find that I do mostly every day now is really just reaching out to different media outlets, journalists, bloggers, anyone that might have a need for content where we talk about my film, or if we're not talking about my film, just talking about the process of making the film.
Mm-hmm.
So mostly I'm just trying to distribute this documentary. Right now, like we were saying earlier, it's on Amazon, but there are a lot of other outlets that could possibly need this type of content because of the subject matter that it deals with.
Mm-hmm.
So most of my time is just spent doing PR and marketing. That's what I would say.
So do you have a timeline on that? Do you sort of say, at this date I stop doing that and say focus on my next documentary, or do
Mhm.
you have that sort of structure in place? How do you not
Um,
get lost in, doing PR for eternity?
Forever, yeah. And I haven't really nailed down how long that's going to be, but definitely I know there is an end point.
Hmm.
And it's not 5 years, it's not 3 years.
Yeah.
It's probably close to a year, and I've only just begun the PR and marketing things that I'm doing now,
Hmm.
and the film was just uh, made available on Amazon in the last 4 weeks, so it's only been there for
Hmm.
4 weeks.
Hmm.
So, but a
Very,
lot of
very
stuff
early
that I
days then.
yeah, so it's still early, and a lot of different Facebook groups and just people I talk to always say you don't want to pull the plug too early. So in other
Hmm.
words, I want to give it enough time for it to reach the maximum amount of people, and then the maximum, it could be a local TV station that could play it. It could be a cable television station that could play it. So
Yes.
I still want to give it some time. So like I said, definitely close to a year, but no more than I wouldn't say I would be still doing the marketing 2 years
Yeah,
from
yeah,
now.
yeah. Because I find it's one of those things where you can sometimes get lost in almost this egotistical sort of, I
Yes.
have this amazing thing and it deserves to be seen. Sometimes you've got to sort of,
Yeah.
a year's a long enough period of time that you can, go through most of the avenues. And if you haven't sort
Hmm.
of found enough by then, I would
Hmm.
argue that it's then time to move, not move on from a whole career perspective. That's for sure. That's not what I'm trying to say. Don't give up so easy.
Yeah.
But what I'm trying to say is, I guess, move on to the next project. And sometimes, I mean, in the creative field, it's more about the body of work than
Yes.
necessarily just the one thing or the
Hmm.
one task.
Hmm.
I mean, it's sort of that. I always think of musicians as when I think of creatives, because that it seems so easy to
Hmm.
pump out a 3 minute, 4 minute, you know,
Yeah.
audio clip essentially.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
and people do it for 5-10 years before they get their first massive hit, and then they never get a hit again. It's this,
Yeah.
and one could argue it's luck, one could argue it's just perseverance, but ultimately I think it's important to realize that um, it just requires a lot of work, and it requires a lot of
Right.
consistency, and it requires this body of work.
Hmm.
Is that sort
Definitely.
of fair to
Definitely.
say, do you think?
Yeah, definitely. And I think which most people end up saying is it's a lot of work, but if you enjoy it, then it doesn't really feel like work. It's still work, but
Hmm.
you don't really get that daily grind feeling. Like when I look back, if I had to do this all over again, it looks like a lot of work. But at the time, I
It
didn't,
didn't feel
I didn't,
like a
I
lot of
didn't. Yeah, it
work.
didn't feel like work at all. But when I look back at the journey, yeah, it was a lot.
It was a
Yeah,
lot. Yeah,
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 it
yeah,
was, a,
yeah.
it was, and I,
But you
and I
weren't
look at
waking
it.
up every day thinking that you've got a lot of work ahead of you in a
No, no,
negative sense. It wasn't
no, not at all.
demoralizing.
Yeah,
It
no, not
was
at all.
a different thing.
Hmm.
Fantastic. I mean, before we get into the top 12, where can people find out more about you?
The best place to go would be Facebook. Um, and you could go to where this film is.
Hmm.
It's Facebook. I learned it from you. So it's facebook.com/ then I learned it from you. And that's where a lot of the updates are. And the website, I learned it from you.com will have a lot of the information there too. And about
Fantastic.
myself there.
And we'll
Yeah.
include all those links in the description
Okay.
for the podcast as well. Did you get the top 12? Did you see the questions in
Yeah,
advance?
yeah,
Yep.
and it was kind of funny because some of them I didn't have three, and that's only because like I'm just in the midst of just marketing person, so
Yeah.
I'm just thinking. So I do try to take a break where I look at something different and
Hmm.
try to relax. So um, some of them I only might have one
That's
because
fine.
I just
That's
it's just
fine. The whole goal
time.
here is to try and get resources, things, individuals that people listening to the podcast can then go and look for themselves.
Right,
You know,
right.
um, get an idea of tools, things like that. So, I mean, we'll hit the ground running. The first is the top 3 books or podcasts that you recommend. So, have you read any books, any good books that you would draw upon or listen to
Uh,
podcasts?
the one that really caught me off guard because I stumbled upon it by accident. Most of the time, it was just books that I would read.
Mm-hmm.
But a very good podcast it's called Indie Film Hustle. Indie Film Hustle,
Mm-hmm.
and it's the gentleman that does those podcasts. He's been doing it for a long time, so he has a wide range of podcasts, and the film industry is very big, so you could focus that you just want to be a writer, like a
Mm-hmm.
screenwriter writing movies, or you might want to be the camera person, or you might be want to be the actor, or you might want to be the distributor. So when you go uh, to their podcast website where they have a list of all of their films, and it's probably better to go to YouTube because you can do a search on the different podcasts.
Mm-hmm.
You can find stuff that really just focuses you on what you want to know, and not because there's some things that people don't want to know. Some
Yeah.
people don't want to know anything about distributing,
Mm-hmm.
and they just want to know about how to write a better film. And he gets some very good guests on there that are very knowledgeable, and I've picked up a lot of things from those podcasts.
Awesome.
And
Anything else? Any other books or podcasts that come to mind?
I would say that's the best because some of the books are a little bit dated now.
Mm-hmm.
So if it's a book about cameras, well, everyone's kind of switching to more digital. So those
Yes,
camera
it's
books
different.
are, yeah, yeah, it's
Yeah,
different now.
yeah,
So that's why I say those podcasts. He releases a lot of
mm-hmm.
podcasts.
Yeah.
So
So there's a lot
he's
of
pretty much
content
on the
there,
cutting. Yeah,
and
he's
it's up
he's
to
pretty
date.
much on the cutting
Yeah,
edge of what's changing and what's new.
fantastic.
Yeah. So that would be the number one
Number one.
place. Yeah.
Awesome. Top 3 software or tools that you can't live without.
Definitely you need an editing program if you're going to be doing any kind of film or video.
Mm. What would
And
you
I,
recommend? What do you
I,
use?
I use Apple's Final Cut
Okay.
10. Yeah.
Yep.
And,
Awesome.
and there are probably ones that are a little bit easier, but I find that if you really need to do something a little bit more sophisticated or technical, you could just go on YouTube, find a video, and it will explain it pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm.
So I do. Final Cut is really big for me.
Final Cut.
Very, very, yeah.
Awesome.
Final Cut.
Anything else you use? Any sort of anything used to keep project management, time tracking, anything like that?
Um, no, because the two films that I did, it was just such a small crew. It was just
Mm-hmm.
very, very easy to keep track of. Um, and I didn't have to manage groups of people, so it was just easier.
Yeah.
Let me think.
No, I mean the whole idea here is if you use it every day, it'll come to your mind. So it
Yeah,
sounds
yeah.
like
No,
Final
there.
Cut's the
Yeah, Final Cut
number
was
one for
really
you.
just, yeah, definitely,
Number one
definitely
thing.
Final Cut.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Top 3 mantras you try and live by.
Mantras. I would say there's one because I'm the marketing PR type person now.
Mm.
It's just one that I've made up for myself. I don't think I've ever seen it anywhere, but I've
Mm.
always learned. It's like I always say to myself, keep going until I reach 300. And what I mean by that is
Mm.
I've noticed that if I'm reaching out to people and trying to get a response, if I reach out to 20 people, I might not hear anything. If I reach out to 50 people, I might not hear anything. But in my experience, when I finally get to 300,
Yeah.
I'll get a flood of response.
Yeah.
So
That's fantastic.
yeah, and you can really get discouraged when you don't hear anything back, or you don't really, no one says anything. But
Yeah.
I've noticed that if I keep that in my head, 300 contacts, I always get some kind of response. And
Yeah.
when I hit 300, it's 6 responses, 10 responses, or something
Yeah.
like that. So
Yeah.
that's what keeps me going.
Yeah.
That's
I
all
mean,
I.
and that speaks to sort of perseverance again. I think, especially nowadays where we get used to just having everything and being given
Yeah.
everything, everything's instant.
Mm-hmm.
It's easy to sort of go, I reached out to 50 people because in your head,
Yeah.
50 sounds like a big number. But,
Yeah.
in reality, those 50 people probably have 50 people getting in touch with them
Yeah.
around the same time. And I don't
Mm-hmm.
know about you, but if I get 50 emails in one day, that's going to take me a week to get through. I'm not going to get
Yeah.
through to everyone in the
Mm-hmm.
day. So, yeah, I think that speaks really highly of your sort of drive and the motivation to
Mm-hmm.
realize that 300 is a big number, but you can't sort of stop unless you get to 300, because at 300, I think you've reached a good volume that you can
Yeah.
say, okay, no one does care. But what
Yeah.
you find,
Yeah.
and what you found out is, by the time you get to 300, you get enough responses that, because people do care,
Yeah.
you need to leave it with them. You need to leave that time, and you need to find new people.
Mm-hmm.
So it sort of speaks to networking as well. You've got to go reach out to this
Mm-hmm.
300 people versus just drawing the line at 20 or 30,
Yeah.
because that just seems
Yeah.
like a huge number. The last one, anyone you follow, top 3 people that you follow, whether it's on social media or anyone who you sort of look up to and admire from a business point of view or an ethical point of view, anyone that, the podcast listeners should follow and should check out?
It would be. I always refer to like older books that I had from 10 years ago, and it's this author. His name is Robert Ringer. Robert Ringer, Ringer, and I don't think he's done any new books. I think they've updated some of his stuff so that if you go online, maybe he has a website or something like that. But I have, I think, 3 of his books, and anytime I'm just not motivated or something like that, I just pull out one of his books, and it's just the way that he explains like that perseverance.
So it's around personal development, personal growth, would you say?
Yeah,
Or
yeah, like self-improvement, stuff like that. One of
mindset,
his
those sort of things?
mindset, and one of the books is called Million Dollar Habits. So it's not necessarily related to money, but just like things that you just do in your life that allows you to be more successful. So that would be one thing that I really go back to quite frequently.
Okay.
That would be something that I would go back to quite frequently.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, that wraps up the top 12. Kevin Douglas Wright, thanks for
Yes.
hopping on the podcast.
Yes.
Yeah.
And thank you,
We'll
Germaine.
catch up
I
soon.
really enjoyed it. Definitely enjoyed the process and meeting you and learning about your hometown, and well, actually, it's now your hometown in
Yeah.
Australia. Yeah, very
Yeah.
nice, very nice.
Awesome. Thanks for that.